So, I'd like to talk a little bit about the concept of power. This is because this is yet again one of those topics that I feel has a lot of misconceptions regarding it. When I first started taking kind of workshops and courses on my path, I took some shamanic workshops, and one of the first things that I was told was that what separated a shaman from a sorcerer was that a sorcerer sort of fiended for power, and that a shaman wasn't interested in power. And this kind of went at odds or was diametrically opposed to my magical training and my magical interests that I've had an interest in since I was a young child that was about power. But ultimately, it was about finding your own power, learning how to wield power. And the definition of power that I really resonated with was our capacity to do things in our lives and in this world. So, if we think about it, that is an excellent definition to start from because if we think about all of the sort of common agents of power that we have, or may not have, like money, what does money allow for? It lets for us to ease our way in our lives, to buy things to make our lives more comfortable and easier, to buy our way into schools that can educate us, buy ourselves into neighborhoods in which we have safety. Money as a source of power can be an interesting topic for sure. But then if we look at that kind of nebulous area of personal power, I contemplated for a long period of time because I've always been kind of an outlier in communities, even communities that were, supposedly meant for outliers. Um, and the good aspect of this is that I never quite sort of bought the party line in any sort of group that I was in. Um, and so, for a long time, my slogan was probably it's attributed to Groucho Marx, but I wouldn't be a part of a group that would have me as a member sort of thing. But in reality, I had a lot of different interests in different areas. And so, you know, um, going from groups in body work to occult groups to, shamanic groups to massage groups and craniosacral groups and all of those different groups had different archetypes in them. And, I never quite fit in to any of the categories that I sort of found myself in. I've very much made peace with that. But I'm sharing this because it gave me a sort of unique vantage point in which to observe the ways that all of these different groups thought about power, either thought of it as a goal or thought of it as something that was terrible and horrible and would turn you into like, an evil Batman villain, or even in more complex regards, thought that people that desired power were greedy or somehow morally corrupt. But at the same time, there was sort of a line or a thought of becoming empowered. And so, as I often do when I'm, shown so many different realities, is that I take a step back as far as I can go with them because I was very interested in the topic. And I was so interested in the topic because if you look at works in occultism and magic, really building power, having power, really means the capacity to do extraordinary things, to meet with gods, to do rituals that um, can change the outcome of communal events, to, change the trajectory of the life force. If you go into really deep magic, a lot of it has to do with immortality. and ways to sort of cheat the human lifespan, so to speak. Um, but a lot of magic really has to do with this idea of empowerment that gets us beyond our physical notion of our lives, our sort of restricted view as humans, our human-centric view. And so we can start to consort with all sorts of energies and beings and spirits that will drastically change our consciousness. And so overall, after a long period of time, what I found was that my home was really in what I would call shamanic work. And shamanic work can look at power a little bit differently. If we look towards the popularized shamanic work, I think it still has this party line of like power is bad sort of thing. That the lust of power is sort of bad. If we look at that, a lot of the spiritual, philosophical sort of movements that came to the West were basically Christian focused, but then had a veneer of whatever spirituality was coming in. And this still happens today. So they'll try to cram a bunch of like spiritual traditions into and say it's psychology and put in some jargon about physics or jargon about psychology or something like that. And try to put in a couple of case studies so it will sort of appeal to a larger audience. More people will accept it. Okay, this is ancestral healing, but here's somebody with a degree from Stanford who says, yeah, this may actually have a point, that sort of thing. And so one of the things that sort of changed my mind over time was having more experience with what I might term shamanism. Um, and so what is problematic about talking about shamanism is that I am talking about work that may have that sort of Venn diagram where the circles overlap a bit with what we might describe as core shamanism. Um, but really, the word in itself is entirely problematic because what a lot of us are doing out there is not core shamanism, and it is not stealing from, for example, Native American traditions or other indigenous traditions. It is connecting with the elements, connecting with the land around us, connecting with the herbs and roots around us, connecting with our lineage, connecting with the beings and energies and gods that will speak with us. And this is a much, I feel I'm biased, but a much truer way of working spiritually. And it's unfortunate that I do have to call it shamanism, but these days I very much go with kind of Emma Wilby's thoughts there. Look, I'm putting in research as well. The thought that in the West we do get very obsessed with titles. And so the thought that somebody that the title what somebody who may be called a witch in one part of the country might be called a shaman in another, might be called something else in another, that there definitely overlaps with these sorts of things. But that's kind of a bit of a divergence, but it gets us to an important point, which is unfortunately, I need to sometimes, in order to teach, talk about what is popularly out there because my thoughts, my opinions, my experience may be right in line with some of it, and it may diverge wildly from a lot of it. For example, I love the concept of the hollow bone in shamanism. That very much is what I'm talking about in terms of Kundalini awakening. If you've watched my video on that, it is about clearing our personal stuff so we can have power flow through us, consciousness flow through us. But in this case, in the case of shamanism, it is to have that hollow bone, to have our pipes clear enough that um, either our own energy and consciousness can flow through. There's a reason it's called fire in the head, it's Kundalini energy, or there can be what I call merge states, which are basically voluntary possession states, where power is drawn in and taken on from other sources that we are in alignment with, and have formed relationships over time with. And so I talk about this sort of work with my advanced students, this type of power building, this type of relationship, that it is, kind of similar to dating, as in you don't just want to like merge with anyone or anything. It takes a lot of skill to get to that point. But I mention it because we're largely talking about power, how it is built, and the different sort of conceptualizations of it. Because I think that we can come to this place where a lot of people are talking about empowerment these days. And some of it may be kind of surface level thoughts, the sort of things that sell books and movies and, get people on Oprah and, all that sort of fun stuff like that. But really, it has an excellent thread behind it. And that idea is that in a disconnected state, we lack power. And so in a fully intact, connected state, we are powerful. This doesn't mean that we'll own a yacht or, that we'll have fantastic health or any of that sort of nonsense. It simply means that there is a definite correlation between connection and feeling empowered within the self and the capacity to do things in this world. And so what I mean by that is that a lot of us spend a whole lot of time because of our childhood wounding, because of areas of conditioning that we've experienced. I've talked about in some of my past blogs about how um, if you tend to, for example, grow up in what might be termed a middle lower class household, it is likely that you will also become a middle lower class individual. And that is not only because of systemic oppression about things like educational opportunities, even about things like nutrition that is available, but it is also about a particular energetics that gets set up, wherein if we were to break out of that, in my shadow workbook, I talk about the concept of crabs in a bucket, about how we might be guilted or shamed for that. We might feel guilt and shame within ourselves. We no longer feel like we belong. We no longer feel like we fit in some regard, even if it's positive, like earning a degree, earning more money, healing yourself. A lot of people get to a point with Kundalini awakenings, with spiritual awakenings, where they are resisting the process because, first of all, who are they to experience a process like this? But also, them healing themselves to a significant degree would move them away from this sort of general consensus, those crabs in a bucket, that pull somebody down and they try to get out of the bucket, that compose their like family of origin, the people they grew up with, the schools they went to, all of that sort of stuff. So one of the funny things that I found after that initial description of like, sorcerers are evil and out for power and magic is bad, that I saw so persistently in some of the initial groups that I was in, was learning that shamanic work is all about power. It is about that hollow bone, about having access to your own power. It is about engaging with other spirits and energies. And what that power lets you do is to create change within yourself and to create change in those around you. One of the effects of, I'm going to go back to spiritual awakening for a moment, because this is kind of a broad description of power. One of the things that happens when you are truly accessing power, be it through shamanic work, through experiencing spiritual awakening and having energy flow through you, through all sorts of different energy work, body work, tai chi, qigong, whatever you're doing that is building power within you. If you are truly engaging in that sort of hollow bone, as it's called in shamanism, you're clearing your pipes, so to speak, so more of your energy can flow through, other people are going to notice on some level. There's an interesting thought about this, though, is that when you have power, some people may choose to deny it or not be able to see it. We blind ourselves to magic. We blind ourselves to the things that we are not ready to see in this world yet. For most of us, there could be all sorts of magical things happening around us, but our senses, as Yeats said, our senses have not suitably sharpened to the point where we can sense them. And so I find approaching reality like this much more helpful. It's quite kind of a paradigm or a perspective shift, because even today, the thought for me can be how much is present in my reality that I am not yet aware of. And that is a thought that endlessly makes me curious. Um, and so I hope that some of you are willing to engage in that thought and have it make you curious as well, because spiritual exploration um, doesn't need to be fueled by wounding. It doesn't need to be fueled by needs to be seen as a certain way. It can be fueled by a sense of curiosity, a sense of play, a sense of wanting to see what the heck happens if we do this type of ritual or spiritual practice, or if we get beyond a certain point that that a certain sort of strata of energy of consciousness. Of course, people can get really, really out of balance with this. One of my favorite stories about this is John Lilly, who many of you may know invented the sensory deprivation tank, who at some point took things way too far and thought he was an alien from the future and supposedly got implants of varying types and, all of this sort of stuff. But he definitely got to a point where he went over the edge a little bit. And my thought is, after doing flotation tanks for quite a while, is that they definitely have a point where you can say, yeah, this can lead me to some extraordinary some extraordinary things. A lot of people, of course, use them for muscle relaxation and that sort of stuff. But um, you know, there was a period in the US where the government was like giving grants to, give people like John Lilly, LSD to give to dolphins to try to communicate with them. And it's it's a fun history if any of you feel like checking that out. Um, but anyway, so back to the thought of power. Um, I do love this idea of empowerment, even though the way that it is expressed in our culture is, of course, going to be sort of like surface level. That's the way that things always come in our culture because it needs to meet large groups of people. Um, but when we really look at empowerment, to me these days, what it means is having every single cell conscious. It means having every single part of myself present. That is one definition of power, because when I am not present, when any of us are not present, our energy field is fractured. Parts of our body are offline. We are not a whole congruent being. We are disassociated. We are distracted. We have parts of ourselves, on way crazy out in space, and parts of ourselves with our ancestors, and parts of ourselves that are in half an hour ago. I find that the clearest way for people to really sense this is that if you ever take a trip on an airplane and you get off that plane and you have that odd sense of not being fully where you are yet, that is because there's likely a part of you that is still at home wondering what you should pack and if you've packed too much or packed too little, or that sort of thing. So that is one way that people can sort of begin to sense where some of their energy might be. The other definition I really love of power is that flow through the system, that hollow bone. And what happens when we have more flow through our system, when we are more whole, when we are more congruent, is first of all, we have more energy. And some of us may not be used to this. I know it took me a long time to get used to the sort of flows of energy that I experience. For example, some of you may notice that I will likely post a couple of videos and then may disappear for a little bit and then may post a whole bunch of a whole bunch of videos on here. And that is because of the flow that I am in at the time, and learning how to follow that flow and have it be a force that is healthy and helpful and brings creative work to the world, helpful work to the world, I hope, is something that you can learn to follow, the sort of rising tides, and then the things going back to shore. And, when things sort of move back out from those rising tides, moving back, those are the times that I'm more quiet. I read and, look at my, look at the birds outside and all of that sort of less external energy sort of stuff. And so the other definition of power that I propose is one that talks more about having that energy flow through your system, having that power flow through your system to create change in your life, to create change in the lives of others. There is a palpable energy to people that have power. Oftentimes we do confuse this with charisma, or with mania in some cases. Or some people have built up their presence by being really carefully cultivating their social media or their following. And so what happens is that it's kind of a pyramid scheme where all of their followers give them energy by looking at them as a god or a guru or something like that. And they're accepting that energy to be in a place of power. That that always fails, inevitably, because taking power from others can only work for a period of time. This is why we have so many documentaries out on, HBO and Netflix and all that sort of stuff about the downfall of gurus, because what happens when they take on all that energy from their followers is that their personal lives and what is unhealed in them kind of goes to heck, because they're not facing it, and eventually they are going to misuse power. And so when we have power, it is how we utilize it, how we wield it, is in accordance with our character. And so if we build our own power through healing, through energy cultivation practices, or through energetic connection to the divine, energetic connection to the elements, in the case of shamanism, to the earth, to people, all of these ways that we can have connection, or in the case of both shamanism and magic, energetic connection and working with in varying ways, types of spirits and beings. And there's all sorts of interesting stuff that can be done in terms of developing a working relationship with varying energies to bring power to the equation in a healthy way. Somebody who does shamanic or magical work doesn't need to be that hollow bone themselves. They do not have to be righteous or, like any of that sort of stuff that we place on them. They can just go the external energy contract sort of route. Um, but it is much better and leads to a much better outcome when we cultivate power within ourselves and from that place of wholeness, then engage with others. Because if we access our own power, we do not have a need to drain others of their power. This is a big thing I talk about with my advanced students as well. Or people used to ask me a lot what to look for in a teacher, those sorts of questions. And it can take a little bit to observe, but part of it is seeing what that person does with power. And energetically, this can be sensed and seen by people who are kind of in a more intermediate or to advanced place, but from kind of a more basic to intermediate place, um, somebody who is teaching obviously thinks that they have something to offer of themselves. If they're saying, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a guru, I'm not whatever, and they are still fulfilling that role, there is a large shadow part of themselves that really needs to claim that title. Otherwise, they're just kind of in the role of the anti-guru, where they are a guru, they're just denying, their desire for power and acclaim and regard and all that sort of stuff, which can be just as bad or sometimes even worse than somebody who is kind of power hungry. But um, the thing to look for if you are kind of more beginning, intermediate, or you are considered advanced and you're still looking at this is that a teacher or somebody, guru, someone should accept compliments or praise or, thanks for being in my life. But ultimately, is that person letting you turn towards yourself and to your own power, your own inner guru, your own teacher? Is that the goal of their teaching, to get you to that place? Or are they wanting for you to um, give them their power, basically to tell them what to think, what to believe, who to be, what to do? All of that would signify power going to that person instead of an acceptance of power with the goal of that power being eventually instilled in you. And so this can get a little bit complicated, but if we look at the role of the guru as somebody who is trying to lead somebody back to themselves in the classical sense, to have that candle lit within themselves, to develop their own power, to develop their own kind of consideration for who they should be, what they should think, how they should be, what their lifestyle, what their diet should be on an individual basis. We can have all sorts of wonderful thoughts out there, but there is that if somebody is giving power to someone to think for them, which a lot of people do, um, ultimately that power should shift somewhere in the relationship back to the student so that they can be the teacher. They can eventually be the guru. They can eventually be somebody who takes that energy, pairs it with their own background, and moves forward in the world to create light, to create creativity in whatever way that they are ready to. So many people are so wounded within themselves that it creates this odd sort of play of power wherein a wounded teacher accepts wounded energy from their students. The biggest way I see this expressed in shamanism is that somebody who gets into shamanic work, who wants to be very nice, maybe has a background as a caretaker as a child where their own needs were repressed. It is the typical sort of counselor therapist archetype. They want to help others because it lets them be in relationship, but it also is a shift of power where they can be in connection, but they don't have to offer anything of themselves. Um, and it also is a relationship typically that is pretty infantilizing. And what I mean by that is that the shamanic teacher takes on the mantle of father or mother for their students. And when they do this, who they are attracting to them are people that are wounded, people that are powerless to the extent that they are stuck in infancy. A part of them, a large part of them, has developmentally stagnated because they did not receive the appropriate amount of love, attention, affection, feelings of being worthwhile in very early stages of development. And so when this plays out, the teacher may be very compassionate, but they are still taking power from the student because they are treating them as wounded birds, as wounded small children. If you are not expecting or giving the opportunity for a student, knowing that a lot of people come to any sort of spiritual work quite wounded, feeling quite powerless, stuck in very early stages of developmental trauma. If you are not opening the door for those who are ready to walk through it, to become more adult, to come into their power, then it is just as much of a power grab as some of these like unfortunate cult leaders that we can all see documentaries of these days. Um, and that may sound kind of harsh, but it's one of those things that I see all the time, and it's really unfortunate because if you really think about it, do you want to be pitied and treated like you're a 2-year-old, or do you want to have somebody help you and see those parts of yourself, but also give you the space if you should choose to kind of grow up a bit, to become more whole, to become more adult, and to move out of a space where you need somebody to act the role of being a spiritual mother or father for them. Because that really is the goal for us to all spiritually grow up, to kind of let go of our childhood pain first, but then get to a place where we can be our own light, where we don't need to play out kind of these roles and plays and all that sort of stuff anymore. Basically, where we can be in our own power. So this has become a little bit of a ramble. Hopefully it's an interesting ramble because I get questions from people coming to me for healing all of the time about energy dynamics because they're just not talked about. And so I will say that power is not a bad thing. It is not a bad thing in magic. It is not a bad thing in shamanism. It is not a bad thing to want to develop within yourself. The way we see power expressed in the world is through bad power. It is through the character of individuals. So it is through individuals who feel powerless within, so they want to take the power of another individual, another group, another part of the world. We can get into some complicated territories there, but all of that power grab comes from the individual feeling powerless within. And when we do sort of empower ourselves, all of those materialist desires for power tend to really die down. And that need to try to take in a completely evil way or a completely, benign way, power from another can really be looked at. Um, because when we take the power of another, it is corrupt power. It isn't our own power, and our body and our soul know that. And our soul really does suffer when we take the power of another. And yeah, so I will leave things there. And so if we were to talk about how to develop your power, best way is personal healing. Another way is to look at your own definition of power, is to look at maybe all the ways that you've been told that power is bad, because there are a lot of religious, spiritual, energetic conditioning that we are given that teach us that thinking for ourselves is bad, that feeling whole is bad, that having power is bad, even if it goes under the language of empowerment. A lot of thoughts really are about fitting in and about kind of, groupthink, that sort of stuff, rather than individually developing the self. And so when we do choose to individually develop ourselves through whatever means that we would like to, there are all sorts of possibilities there. And if we look at how our power is flowing, where we want to aim it, basically what we want to do with it, most of our power is expressed as healing, it is expressed as creativity, if it goes kind of along with our character of wanting to do good, of wanting to express our power in some way to the world. And so I will say that healing might be somebody deciding to be an accountant. Not everybody needs to become like, a healer or anything like that. Our creativity, our power can express in so many different ways in this world, which is really what is so beautiful about people coming into their own, about people coming into their own power, into their own light, into their own being, is that they can really decide, free from the constraints of all of the oppressive powers around us, what is right for them, what really their flow should be connected to, what feels like the right way to be in power, what feels like the wrong way to be in power, and start to really look at how we may interact with power in the world, how we may take from others or not, how we may be in good reciprocity with people, where there's nice flow back and forth, or the areas of us that might be kind of stuck in wanting to take from others or wanting to give too much of our power away. So I will leave things there. I hope, as always, that this has helped you in some way. If you have any questions for further videos, feel free to drop them below.